Number 1. The Serranía de la Lindosa Ice Age panels. Deep in the Colombian Amazon, in the department of Guaviare, there is a wall of stone that runs for nearly 8 miles. Its surface is not blank. It is covered, edge to edge, in tens of thousands of small figures painted in red ochre, handprints, geometric shapes, people with raised arms, and animals. Thousands of animals. Most of them you would expect in a rainforest, but some of them stop your eye and refuse to let go because they are creatures that have no business being on that wall at all. The site was announced to the world in 2020, the product of a European research project called Last Journey, led by Jose Iriarte of the University of Exeter, working with Mark Robinson and the Colombian archaeologist Gaspar Morcote Rios. For decades, this stretch of the Amazon was sealed off by armed conflict. Only after the 2016 peace accord could scientists reach it safely. When they excavated the floor of a shelter called Cerro Azul, they found charcoal and tools dating human occupation to between roughly 12,600 and 11,800 years ago. And in those same earliest layers, they found fragments of ochre, the very pigment used on the walls above. So who lived here, and what did they draw? Look closely at certain panels, and researchers see a large, hunched, shaggy shape with heavy claws, a giant ground sloth. Nearby, a bulky animal with a domed head and what looks like a trunk, a mastodon or a gomphothere. And there, most startling of all, an animal with a small head, a manned neck, and a body that reads unmistakably as a horse. Here is why that matters. Horses evolved in the Americas, then vanished from the continent at the end of the Ice Age, and did not return until Europeans brought them back roughly 10,000 years later. A wild horse painted by an Amazon artist would be a first-hand record of an animal that science says should have already been gone. The team argues the ecology fits. At the end of the Pleistocene, this corner of the Amazon was not dense jungle, but an open mosaic of savanna and forest, exactly the kind of country those extinct giants roamed. Not everyone is convinced. Skeptics, including the rock art scholar Eckhard Malotki, warn that a vague four-legged shape can become anything the viewer wants. That maned animal could be a capybara. The sloth could be a stylized spirit. The paintings cannot be carbon dated directly because ochre holds no organic carbon, so the argument rests on context, not the pigment itself. And that tension between an eyewitness account and a hopeful projection is exactly the thread we are going to follow across every wall in this video, because the next painting was once treated as absolute proof until a camera took it apart. Number 2. The Black Dragon Canyon Pterosaur. In the San Rafael swell of eastern Utah, in a place called Black Dragon Canyon, there is a red painting on a sandstone wall. For most of the 20th century, a certain kind of visitor looked at it and saw something extraordinary. A flying reptile, a long neck, a beaked head, and 2 broad wings spread wide, as if a pterosaur had been caught in mid-glide by an archaic hunter thousands of years ago. The image belongs to a tradition called the Barrier Canyon style, made by hunter-gatherers somewhere between roughly 1,500 and 4,000 years ago, possibly older. The Pterosaur reading was promoted from the 1940s by the creationist writer Clifford Burdick, and it gained a strange respectability in 1979 when a well-known Utah rock art author, Francis Barnes, described the figure as resembling a pterosaur. From there, it became a favorite of young Earth websites, presented as proof that humans and flying reptiles had lived side by side. There was a problem hiding in plain sight. For years, people had helped the faint image along by tracing its outline in chalk. That chalk connected marks that were never connected, welding several separate figures into one imaginary beast. In 2015, a team led by Jean-Louis Lecalec, with the rock art experts Paul Bon and Marvin Rowe, went to the wall with a tool called D-Stretch. D-Stretch is a decorrelation stretch technique. It takes a normal photograph and mathematically amplifies tiny differences in color that the human eye cannot see, revealing faded pigment as if it were fresh. When they processed the panel, the pterosaur simply fell apart. What had looked like one animal was in fact at least 5 separate figures, several small human-like forms, a serpent, a dog-shaped animal, and a larger beast. The wings and the beak were unrelated painted elements combined with the natural mineral staining on the rock. Portable X-ray fluorescence confirmed the pigment boundaries, showing where one figure ended and another began. Their findings were published in the journal Antiquity that same year. Pterosaurs, of course, went extinct around 66 million years ago, tens of millions of years before the first human being. No hunter in Utah ever saw one. What they saw was a panel of ordinary figures, and what later viewers saw was a monster assembled by their own expectations, a textbook case of pareidolia, the mind's habit of building familiar shapes out of scattered noise. Le Collec put it simply: once you can see the individual figures, the pterosaur vanishes and never comes back. The lesson stuck. Chalking and outlining rock art is now widely condemned and often illegal, precisely because it can invent things that were never there. Which raises an obvious question. If a camera could dissolve one impossible animal, what would it do to a dinosaur carved beside a human being? Number 3, the Kachina Bridge dinosaur petroglyph. Natural Bridge's national monument in the far southeast of Utah is famous for its enormous stone arches. Beneath one of them, Kachina Bridge, the sandstone carries petroglyphs pecked by ancestral Puebloan and earlier archaic peoples over the last several thousand years. And among them, one shape has launched 1,000 arguments. To some eyes, it is unmistakable. A long neck rising to a small head, a heavy body, a long tail, standing near two small human figures. A sauropod, an apatosaurus, they say, carved by people who must have seen one alive. That claim was pushed hard in creationist circles, including groups like Answers in Genesis, as evidence that dinosaurs and humans shared the same world only a few thousand years ago. In 2011, 2 researchers decided to test it properly rather than just argue about it. The paleontologist Phil Center, working with the rock art specialist Sally Cole, published a detailed study in the journal Paleontologia Electronica. They examined the dinosaur up close, element by element. What they found was that the shape is not a single carving at all. It is a composite. The long neck and head turned out to be a separate serpentine figure combined with a natural mud smear and mineral staining. The legs belong to an entirely different petroglyph nearby. Crucially, the different parts show different degrees of repatination, the slow redarkening of desert varnish over the pecked rock. In other words, the pieces were made at different times by different hands and were never meant to be read together. There is no single continuous outline. The sauropod exists only in the join between unrelated marks. Non-avian dinosaurs died out around 66 million years ago. No human ever met one. Center has made something of a specialty of this, dismantling alleged dinosaur art around the world, including the famous Stegosaurus carving at Ta Proam in Cambodia, which is far more plausibly a boar or a chameleon framed by decorative foliage. The explanation in every case is the same pair of forces: pareidolia, the seeing of shapes, and confirmation bias, the wanting to see them. And yet it would be wrong to sneer at the impulse. Indigenous peoples genuinely did notice fossils and weave them into story. The classic example is the way Protoceratops skulls in Central Asia may have fed the legend of the griffin. That is real and fascinating. But it is a different thing entirely from claiming a living dinosaur posed for a portrait. The National Park Service treats these carvings as what they are: precious ancestral Puebloan heritage. Hold on to that distinction between a real fossil inspiring a myth and a myth being projected onto a wall, because our next painting is a giant, and the myth attached to it did not come from creationists. It came from the search for aliens. Number 4. The Tassili, Najer, great god of Jabbaren. In the deep Sahara of southeastern Algeria rises a plateau called Tassili Najer, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1982, holding thousands of painted panels across a maze of eroded sandstone. Its art falls into periods. The oldest and strangest is called the Round Head period, made roughly 10,000 to 8,000 years ago. And at a site called Jabbaren stands its most notorious figure. He is enormous, described in some accounts as around 6 meters tall. He towers over the herds and human figures painted around him. His body is broad and simple, and his head is a smooth, featureless dome, like a helmet with no face inside it. When the French ethnographer Henri Lotte documented these walls during expeditions in 1956 and 1957, he gave this figure a nickname that would haunt it forever: the Great Martian God. Lotte meant it partly as a joke, bit of expedition color, but the name escaped. A decade later, Erich von Däniken folded the Tassili figures into his 1968 bestseller, Chariots of the Gods, presenting that domed head as a spacesuit and the whole panel as a record of ancient astronauts visiting Africa. To mainstream archaeologists, the reading is far richer and far stranger than aliens. The round head figures are widely interpreted as spirit beings, masked ritual dancers, or shamans, painted at a time when the Sahara was not desert at all. During the so-called African humid period, the region was a green savanna dotted with lakes, home to hippos, crocodiles, and large human communities. Some scholars go further. The ethnomycologist Giorgio Samarini argued that certain roundhead figures are holding mushrooms and that these panels may record the ritual use of psychoactive fungi, trance states painted onto rock. The featureless head in this reading is not a helmet but a mask, or the deliberate blankness of something not quite human. There is a complication in the record worth naming honestly. Lotte's team was later found to have added or improved a small number of figures elsewhere in the region, a genuine scandal in Saharan archaeology. The great god itself, however, is considered authentic, and the halo or radiance around sacred figures is not exotic at all. Across the entire ancient world, from Europe to Asia, artists ringed the heads of gods and spirits with rays. Scale did the same work. The giant is not big because he is an astronaut. He is big because he matters more than everything around him. The leading modern authority on Saharan rock art, Jean-Louis Le Collec, the same scholar who dissolved the Utah Pterosaur, reads these images firmly within human ritual, not extraterrestrial visitation. Keep that halo in mind. Because on the other side of the planet, a set of figures with rings around their heads and huge dark eyes has been called alien so often that the people who actually own them have had to fight back. Number 5, the Wandjina figures of the Kimberley. In the Kimberley region of northwestern Australia, painted across rock shelters and overhangs are some of the most arresting figures in all of world art. They are called Wandjina. Their bodies are painted white, their faces are dark, dominated by 2 enormous black eyes and a nose, and they have no mouth. Around each head spreads a halo of radiating lines. To a viewer primed by science fiction, the combination is instant and obvious. Big eyes, no mouth, a glowing halo. Surely these are aliens. That reading has been repeated in fringe books for decades, and it is not only wrong, it is offensive to the people whose living religion these figures belong to. The Wandjina are ancestral cloud and rain spirits, central to the beliefs of the Warora, Gwion, and Wunambal peoples. They are not relics of a dead culture. They are active, sacred beings. And there is a reason they have no mouth. In the tradition, if the Wandjina had mouths, the rain they command would never stop. The halo is not a spaceman's helmet. It is cloud and lightning and storm. These are portraits of the weather itself given a face. This is one of the very few rock art traditions on Earth that is still alive. By custom, senior custodians periodically repaint the figures to renew their power, which means an individual image can be quite recent even though the tradition behind it may be thousands of years old, following even older Kimberley styles. That practice of renewal is exactly why the art has stayed vivid across generations. The pigments are earth and mineral, white pipeclay and huntite, red and yellow ochres, and charcoal black. Each Wandjina is tied to a specific clan estate and to stories about how the land and its precious water sources were made. The alien label is not a harmless misreading. In 2007, an unauthorized series of Wandjina-style streetworks and sculptures appeared around Katoomba, far from Kimberley country, and it triggered a serious dispute over who has the right to depict these beings at all. For the custodians, painting a Wandjina without authority is not art, it is a violation. Anthropologists working with communities such as Moanjum have documented the strict cultural protocols that govern who may paint and where and how. The huge eyes, far from being alien, are often understood as the intensity of the storm's gaze. So here we have the exact mirror image of the fringe fantasy. Not visitors from space, but the sky itself, worshipped and painted by people still standing in front of the walls today. And yet the shape keeps recurring. A human figure, a ring of rays around the head. We have seen it in the Sahara and now in Australia. Our next stop is a valley in the Italian Alps, where the same motif got the same nickname, and where 250,000 carvings give us the context to finally test it. Number 6. The Val Camonica Astronauts. In the Italian Alps, in the region of Lombardy, the Val Camonica Valley holds one of the greatest concentrations of prehistoric carvings anywhere on the planet. The estimates run from 200,000 to 300,000 individual engravings pecked into rock that Ice Age glaciers ground smooth. It was Italy's very first UNESCO World Heritage Site, inscribed in 1979. The carvings span more than 8,000 years, from the end of the Ice Age through the Neolithic, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and on into Roman and even medieval times. Among this vast gallery, 2 figures became world famous for the wrong reason. They are anthropomorphic, 2 upright human shapes, and around each head is a crown of radiating rays. In their hands, they hold objects. Once again, the ancient astronaut writers arrived, and once again the nickname stuck. The astronauts of Val Camonica, their ray crowns read as helmets bristling with antennae. The objects in their hands read as tools or instruments. These particular figures date mainly to the Iron Age, made by the local people known as the Comuni, in roughly the first millennium before the Common Era. And this is where sheer weight of evidence becomes powerful, because unlike a lone panel in a remote canyon, these figures sit inside a fully documented culture. The archaeologist Emanuele Annati spent his career cataloging this valley, founding the Centro Comune di Studi Preistorici in 1964. The carvings show hunting, warfare, plowing, buildings, maps, warriors, and ritual. The ray-headed figures belong to that world, not to outer space. Radiate heads are a common convention across Bronze and Iron Age Europe, almost always linked to the sun and to the divine. A figure with rays around its head is a figure marked as holy, a priest, a deity, or a worshipper caught in the act of prayer, the rays standing for radiance and spiritual power. We even inherit an echo of this valley in modern life. One of its motifs, a looping figure called the Rosa Comuna, the Comunian rose, became the official symbol of the Lombardy region. The Comuni were not isolated. They traded and mixed with Etruscans and later Romans, and eventually developed their own alphabet, all of it recorded in the rock. The spaceman reading survives only by ignoring every bit of that context and leaning entirely on a modern visual coincidence, a crown of rays that happens to resemble a cartoon helmet. Set beside 200,000 other carvings of ordinary Iron Age life, the astronauts turn back into what they always were, human beings reaching toward the sacred. But before you conclude that every strange image is a misunderstanding, we need to go to a cave in France, where the strangest detail of all, spots on a horse, was dismissed as fantasy for 100 years, until science proved the artist right. Number 7. The Dappled Horses of Pech Merle. In the Lot region of southwestern France lies the cave of Pech Merle, rediscovered in 1922 by a group of local teenagers and later studied by the priest and prehistorian Abbé Amédée Lemosy. On one wall is a panel known as the Frieze of the Spotted Horses, painted around 25,000 years ago, in the period archaeologists call the Gravettian. It shows 2 large horses positioned back to back. Their bodies and the space around them are covered in dark round spots. Scattered among them are red and black handprints and rows of dots. For most of the 20th century, scholars had a problem with those spots. No known horse, living or fossil, was thought to have carried a coat like that. So the spots were explained away. They were symbolic, they were magical marks, they were decoration. They could not possibly be a real animal because a spotted horse in the Ice Age was simply imaginary. Then, in 2011, genetics settled the argument. A team led by Melanie Prouvost and Arne Ludwig, with the ancient DNA specialist Michael Hofreiter and others, published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They analyzed the coat color genes of 31 horses that lived before domestication, including animals from the Ice Age itself. And there it was. The genetic variant called the leopard complex, the same allele that gives modern Appaloosa horses their spotted coats, was present in wild Pleistocene horses. Spotted horses were real. They had lived. The artists of Pech Merle had not invented anything. They had painted what they saw. A century-old assumption collapsed under a strand of ancient DNA. There's even a haunting genetic footnote. In modern horses, that same leopard complex variant, when inherited from both parents, is linked to night blindness, a small biological detail folded into a 25,000-year-old painting. Now, some scholars add a subtle caution. The spots on the wall spill beyond the outlines of the horses, so the panel may blend accurate observation with a layer of symbolic patterning. Both things can be true at once, a real animal and a decorated one. The rest of the cave is a masterpiece in its own right, with mammoths, bison, aurochs, a figure known as the Wounded Man, and, preserved in a clay floor, some of the best Paleolithic human footprints in all of Europe. Unlike Lascaux, Pech Merle is one of the few original decorated caves still open to visitors, under strict limits. The artist even used the natural shape of the rock, letting a protrusion in the wall become one horse's muzzle. This is the case that should make everyone humble. The impossible animal was real all along. So when we return to Australia and meet a painting of a giant bird that science says died out tens of thousands of years too early, we cannot simply laugh it off. Number 8. The Gwion Thunderbird. Back in the Kimberley of Western Australia, beneath and beside the Great Wandjina, is an older layer of art entirely. These are the Gwion figures, long known by the name Bradshaw, after the pastoralist Joseph Bradshaw, who reported them in 1891. They are slender, graceful human forms, painted in a deep mulberry red pigment, adorned with tasseled headdresses, sashes, and fine accessories. They are among the oldest figurative art on the Australian continent, and they predate the Wandjina tradition. Dating them is difficult, but nature has helped. Mud wasp nests built over some figures can be dated, and in 2020, a team led by Damien Finch, publishing in Nature Human Behavior, used radiocarbon on those nests to place the main phase of this art at around 12,000 years ago, with some evidence stretching back to at least 17,000. And it is within this tradition that one panel has caused a quiet sensation. Researchers, including Ben Gunn, have argued that a particular painting shows a bird, but not an ordinary bird. Heavy-bodied, with a massive beak and thick legs, it has been identified as Gwion newtoni, a flightless thunderbird that stood around 2 meters tall and weighed perhaps 230 kilograms. Here is the shock. Gwion was long believed to have gone extinct around 40,000 to 50,000 years ago. If a painting only 12 to 17,000 years old truly shows one, then either the bird survived tens of thousands of years longer than the fossils suggest, or the art is far older than the wasp nests imply. Either way, something in the accepted story would be wrong. The skeptics have strong points. The image could be an emu. It could be a magpie goose. It could be a stylized composite that never existed. This is not a settled case, and it sits right on top of one of the most heated debates in Australian science, the timing of the megafauna extinction and how large a role humans played in it. The researcher Gifford Miller argued from burnt eggshell that people were hunting Gwion around 47,000 years ago. But others dispute whether that eggshell even belongs to Gwion or to a giant extinct fowl called Progura instead. What makes the panel so tantalizing is exactly what made the Amazon horse and the Pech Merle spots so powerful. It might be an eyewitness, a human hand recording an animal that science had buried. Or it might be pareidolia, wearing a headdress. We genuinely do not yet know. And that uncertainty is the honest heart of this entire subject. So let us go to the most famous painted cave on Earth, and stand before an animal that, unlike the horse or the bird, corresponds to nothing in the record at all. Number 9. The Unicorn of Lascaux. On the 12th of September, 1940, 4 teenagers and a dog named Robot stumbled into a hole in a hillside near Montignac in the Dordogne region of France. What they found was Lascaux, the cave often called the Sistine Chapel of Prehistory. Its walls hold nearly 6,000 figures, painted between roughly 17,000 and 21,000 years ago, dominated by immense aurochs, horses, stags, and ibex. In the very first chamber, the Hall of the Bulls, before the great parade of recognizable animals begins, there is a single strange beast. It is nicknamed the Unicorn of Lascaux. The nickname is misleading because the animal has 2 horns, not one, 2 long, straight horns, that sweep forward from its head. Its body is heavy and boxy, its flank is marked with rings or spots, its head is oddly square. and it matches no known animal, living or extinct. Of every image in this video, the unicorn is the purest puzzle. The Amazon horse might be a real horse. The Pech Merle spots turned out to be real. But the Unicorn of Lascaux resembles nothing in the entire zoological record. So what is it? The interpretations pile up. Some say it is an imaginary or mythical composite, a creature of the mind rather than the field. Some say it is a human figure disguised in an animal skin, a shaman rendered as a beast. Some say it is a pregnant animal, its swollen body misread. And some, including scholars examining the overlapping brushwork, argue that it is actually two animals whose horns and bodies happen to merge into the illusion of one. A giant version of the same pareidolia that built the Utah Pterosaur, only this time created by the painters themselves. The great early prehistorian Abbé Henri Breuil puzzled over Lascaux' imagery, and the forward-pointing horns have even prompted speculative comparisons to distant animals like the Tibetan antelope. But no answer has ever stuck. The placement is what unsettles. The unicorn is first. It stands at the threshold of the greatest gallery humanity had yet produced, as if to announce that what follows is not simply a record of the hunt. Lascaux itself is fragile almost beyond belief. It opened to the public in 1948 and had to be closed in 1963 because the breath, heat, and humidity of the visitors, followed by outbreaks of mold, were destroying the paintings. Today, people visit meticulous replicas, Lascaux II and Lascaux IV, while the original rests in darkness. The pigments were pure mineral, ochres for yellow and red, manganese and charcoal for black, blown and dabbed and drawn, with the natural swell of the rock used to give the animals volume. And at the head of it all stands a creature that never existed, painted with total confidence, which brings us to the last wall, and to a being that was impossible not by accident, but entirely on purpose. Number 10. The Horned Sorcerer of Les Trois-Frères. In the French Pyrenees, in the region of Ariège, lies the cave of the Trois-Frères, the three brothers named for the three sons of Count Gwion, who explored it in 1914. Its art is Magdalenian, roughly 13,000 to 15,000 years old. And high on the wall of a chamber called the Sanctuary, some 4 meters above the floor, presiding over a dense tangle of more than 280 engraved animals, is one of the most famous and most debated images in all of prehistory. It is called the Sorcerer. It is a therianthrope, a being that is part human and part animal, and it is impossible in the most literal sense. It has a roughly human body and legs, but from its head rise the antlers of a stag. Its eyes are large and round, owl-like, staring straight out. It has the paws of a bear or a lion, and behind it hangs the tail of a horse. No such creature has ever lived or could ever live. This is not a misidentified animal or a trick of overlapping marks. It is a deliberate fusion of species, a body assembled from parts that do not belong together. The best-known version of the Sorcerer is a drawing made by Abbé Henri Breuil, who studied the cave and read the figure as a shaman, or a god, or the great master of animals presiding over the hunt. Later, researchers have raised a careful objection that Breuil's drawing may have sharpened or exaggerated features, especially the antlers, compared to the faint, hard-to-see original, which is made partly by engraving and partly by black paint. That caution matters because so much of how the world pictures the Sorcerer comes from one artist's interpretation of a shadow on stone. The cave does not stand alone. It is part of a linked system known as the Volpe Caves, together with Anlain and the Tuc d'Audubert, where 2 astonishing clay bison were sculpted against a rock. This whole complex was a place of ritual. The Sorcerer became the central exhibit in a great debate about the origins of religion itself, championed by researchers such as David Lewis Williams, who saw in these therianthropes the imagery of trance and shamanic vision. A second composite being in the same cave, a bison-headed figure apparently playing a musical bow, only deepens the impression. And the impulse is ancient beyond this cave. The Lion Man figurine from Hohenstein-Stadel in Germany, a human body with a lion's head, is around 40,000 years old. The human mind was fusing creatures into impossible beings almost as soon as it began making art at all. The owl-like eyes of the Sorcerer, so rare in cave art, seem to look back at you across 13,000 years. So we have walked past 10 walls. Some showed us monsters that were real. Some showed us monsters that were never there. Now we need to ask why our own minds keep building them. Step back from the individual walls and a single mechanism explains a surprising amount of what we have seen. It is called pareidolia, the brain's relentless habit of forcing familiar forms out of random noise. It is the same instinct that finds faces in clouds and animals in wallpaper. On a rock wall crowded with faded, overlapping marks, that instinct becomes a machine for manufacturing creatures. The Utah Pterosaur and the Kachina Bridge sauropod are the two cleanest examples. In both cases, separate figures, natural staining, and wishful looking combined into a single animal that was never drawn. But there was a second, more damaging force at work in those cases. Enhancement. For decades, people chalked and outlined faint paintings to make them clearer, and in doing so, they welded unrelated marks together and literally invented animals in permanent pigment. The correction came from technology used honestly. Dia-stretch, the decorrelation stretch method, amplifies faded color digitally without ever touching the rock, and it repeatedly dissolves the monster back into its parts. Portable X-ray fluorescence maps the chemistry of the pigments, showing where one figure stops and another starts. The slow darkening of desert varnish, called repatination, reveals when marks were made at different times and were never a single image. Behind all of it sits confirmation bias, the powerful human tendency to see what we already believe. The creationist arrives wanting a dinosaur, the ancient astronaut enthusiast arrives wanting a helmet, and the wall, ambiguous and silent, obligingly provides. Even the great documentarians shaped what we see. Bruy's beautiful drawings of the Sorcerer became for many people more real than the faint original on the stone. The scholars who get this right, people like Jean-Loïc Le Callec and Phil Center, share a method. They do not dismiss the strange claim out of hand, and they do not embrace it either. They test it with imaging, chemistry, and patience. And they never damage the wall to do so, which is why fragile originals like Lascaux are now protected behind replicas. The distinction that matters is razor thin, but everything. There is a difference between saying the artist drew this creature and saying I can see this creature. One is a claim about the past, the other is a claim about your own eyes. But if pareidolia explains the pterosaur and the sauropod, it does not explain everything. Because at least twice on our tour, the impossible animal turned out to be completely, verifiably real. The spotted horses of Pech Merle are the great warning against easy skepticism. For 100 years, the experts knew those spots were symbolic because a spotted horse could not have existed. Then, ancient DNA reached back into the Ice Age and found the leopard complex allele living in real wild horses, and the experts were simply wrong. The artists had been right all along. They had painted from life. That single result should change how we look at every other strange panel, because it proves that prehistoric people were capable of precise, accurate observation, recording details of the living world that the science of the 20th century had confidently denied. The Serranía de la Lindosa panels in the Amazon may be the next case in line, if those hunched clawed shapes really are giant ground sloths. And that manned animal really is a native Ice Age horse. Then the walls are an eyewitness record of a lost world, painted at the exact moment it was vanishing. The case is not closed, but it is not absurd, because we now know the terminal Pleistocene Amazon was open savanna teeming with megafauna. The Gwion panel in Australia poses the same challenge in reverse, asking whether a giant bird outlived its own fossil record, and forcing scientists to consider that extinction dates drawn from bones may be corrected by images on stone. And there is a deeper, older pattern here. Indigenous peoples across the world noticed fossils and folded them into knowledge and myth long before formal paleontology existed. The likely link between Central Asian Protoceratops skulls and the legend of the griffin is one example of real observation transformed into story. The lesson cuts in both directions. Sometimes a strange painting is a trick of the eye, and skepticism is right. Sometimes a strange painting is a faithful report from deep time, and skepticism is exactly what blinds us to it. The only honest tool is the willingness to test each case on its own evidence, and to accept that the answer might overturn something we were sure of. Which raises the most interesting question of all. What kind of mind sits down in the dark and paints these things, whether real or imagined, in the first place? The therianthropes are the clearest window we have into the prehistoric mind, because they cannot be explained as simple observation. Nobody ever saw a man with antlers, owl eyes, and a horse's tail. The Sorcerer of the Trois-Frères and the Lion Man figurine 40,000 years old prove that the human imagination could combine and invent, could picture beings that exist only in thought. That is the birth of the supernatural, rendered in pigment and ivory. Look across the walls and a shared symbolic grammar appears. The halo of rays around a sacred head shows up in the Sahara, in Australia, and in the Italian Alps. Three cultures with no contact converging on the same visual idea of radiance and power. The mouthless Wandjina encodes a rule about the endless rain. The giant scale of the Tassili great god encodes status. These are not random pictures. They are a language. Many researchers following David Lewis Williams connect this imagery to altered states of consciousness, to trance and shamanic vision, and even to the geometric patterns the brain generates in such states. The possible mushrooms in the hands of the Tassili figures fit that thread, hinting that some of these images record not the outer world, but the inner one. The choice of setting reinforces it. So much of this art is placed in deep, dark, hard-to-reach chambers, 4 meters up a wall, far from daylight, in spaces that seem chosen for ritual rather than decoration. Researchers have even studied the acoustics of decorated caves and found that painted panels often cluster where the sound resonates. The craft itself was serious knowledge. The sourcing and grinding and blowing of mineral pigments, the exploitation of the rock's natural relief to give an animal volume. And the living Wandjina tradition shows us the final piece, that repainting an image can be an act of devotion, a renewal of belief carried unbroken across generations. What these artists chose to depict and what they chose to leave out tells us they were not merely recording the world. They were arguing about it, worshipping it, and imagining beyond it, and that is precisely why losing these walls would be a catastrophe. Every image in this video is under threat, and the story of how we protect them is as revealing as the art itself. Lascaux is the cautionary tale. Opened to visitors in 1948, it was closed by 1963 because human breath, warmth, and moisture, followed by invasions of mold, were killing paintings that had survived for 17,000 years. The solution was radical: to seal the original and build exact replicas, Lascaux 2 and Lascaux 4, so the public could see the art without destroying it. Pech Merle survives by strict limits on how many people may enter each day. The Volpe Caves, home to the Sorcerer, survive largely by staying in private hands and mostly closed. Tassili Najer is protected in part by sheer remoteness, requiring days of desert travel to reach, though even there vandalism and looting take their toll. The Amazon panels of the Serranía de la Lindosa face a different enemy: the deforestation and unregulated tourism now arriving in a region only recently opened. And some threats are not physical but human, questions of who controls the meaning of an image. The Wandjina are a living sacred tradition, and the right to repaint them belongs to specific custodians, which is why the unauthorized Katoomba works of 2007 caused such pain and anger. The Gwion figures came with their own controversy, as the independent researcher Graham Walsh documented thousands of sites in ways that sometimes clashed with Aboriginal custodians and academics alike. Running through all of it is a tension between open access and preservation, between the scholar's desire to study and the community's right to protect. Chalking, as we saw, is irreversible harm. Climate change accelerates the weathering of exposed rock. The antiquities trade fuels looting. Against these forces, the best defense is often digital, recording every panel in high resolution through photogrammetry and DS-Tretch, building an archive that survives even if the original does not. But a photograph is not the thing itself. And that raises the final question of this whole journey. If these walls are speaking to us across such enormous spans of time, what exactly were they trying to say? Everything we have seen falls into two categories, and the confusion between them is the whole story. There are the images that are impossible but real. The spotted horses, perhaps the Amazon megafauna, perhaps the giant bird, creatures that science doubted until it was forced to look again. And there are the images that are impossible by design. The unicorn that matches no animal, the antlered sorcerer built from mismatched parts, beings that were never meant to exist outside the mind that made them. To tell the two apart is the entire task of anyone who stands before a painted wall. These panels are humanity's first attempt to record the world, and to record what could not be found in the world. There is a confidence in the hand that drew a creature it believed in, whether that creature grazed on a Pleistocene plain or walked only through a vision. Science can recover a great deal from pigment, an allele, a date from a wasp nest, the chemistry of ochre, the separation of figures a chalk line once fused. But it cannot always recover meaning, and Pech Merle stands as a permanent caution against certainty in either direction. The vindicated spots warn us not to laugh too quickly at the strange. The dissolved Pterosaur warns us not to believe too eagerly what we wish to see. The living Wandjina remind us that some of these images are not puzzles at all, but heritage, still tended by the people they belong to. And the unicorn remains first in the greatest gallery ever painted, an open question that no imaging technique will ever fully close. Each of these walls is an eyewitness. Some testify to a vanished world of flesh and blood. Others testify to something just as real, the moment a human mind looked past what was in front of it and pictured something more. When we call these things impossible, what we really mean is that they cross the line between seeing and believing, and that the people who made them did not draw that line where we do. Picture it one last time. Torchlight moving across a stone wall deep underground, and a single painted eye, an owl's eye, a spirit's eye, catching the flame and staring back, patient, certain, and still waiting. After all these thousands of years to be understood.